Hello, I'm Seb, and I somehow managed to delete the beginning to this video, it seems. So I'm just going to calmly sit here, breathe, and reshoot the beginning of it. And then at some point, you'll see me like warp to my bookshelves when we catch up with the old footage. But yeah, the classics. People often want to read them, but may have some hesitancy because it seems like a big commitment in terms of time or brain power that you have to invest, right? So one way to counteract that is by reading classics which have a shorter word count. It just makes it more manageable, which is why I've compiled these recommendations. Beginning with The Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe, whose name sounds suspiciously similar to Werther, although I'm not sure in the German pronunciation if it does or not. But in any case, don't try to fool us, Goethe. We know that you're writing about yourself. This was a really influential novel about a sad boy, Werther, who falls in love, and then he's very happy, and then he's very sad. This was a big deal because books were more plot oriented at the time, whereas this is unashamedly just sentimental and not about plot so much as about interiority and subjectivity and feelings. It's epistolary, which means it's written in these little letters, right? So you can see the dates there, and they kind of it breaks it up. Yeah, you can see there easily into nice small readable chunks. And yeah, it has that nice feeling if you're going through someone's personal letters, a bit voyeuristic maybe. Begins with this nice little message. You, good soul, who feel a compulsive longing such as Werther's, draw consolation from his sorrows, and let this little book be your friend whenever through fate or through your own fault you can find no closer companion. Which I just think is really cute. So if you want a emo little friend, you could do much worse than young Werther. Although, trigger warning, I should say, this book was banned in a lot of countries for alleged suicide spates from people who read it. So it may be cursed. There is that, so just as a heads up. Next up is To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. I should say the way that I've categorized these is all of them are under 200 words long. But this one, although in this edition is under 200 words long, yeah, the font is very small. And I feel that there's probably editions of To the Lighthouse where it goes more than 200. But in any case, this is a book about a bunch of people who also it's kind of plotless, like Werther. They go to their summer house and there's a lighthouse and they just chill by the beach, and we see them at different points of their life doing this. It's stream of consciousness, so we're going into their impressions and their thoughts, just like their observations about the other people who are there. It's a family, but they bring friends. I think there's some sort of romance thing that happens at some point. So yeah, very impressionistic. Now, cards on the table. I do not like stream of consciousness, and I don't like Virginia Woolf's writing. So you may be wondering, why are you recommending this book? I've read 3 Virginia Woolfs, I don't know, but this is the one I like the most out of this and Mrs. Dalloway and The Waves. And I do think that she's well loved for a reason. So just because I don't like a book doesn't mean that I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to someone if I think that it's something that a lot of people might like. And there are lots of bits in this that I did really like. There's this one thing where I think we follow the perspective of a gust of wind, as it moves around. So just things that are quite surprising. And so even if I feel like I don't connect with Virginia Woolf's writing and her project because of maybe the values I think that she imbues her work with, or something like that. Something just doesn't gel with me, but I think it does gel with a lot of readers, and also it's just a specific type of book. And I think, for the sake of being broad-minded, it deserves a place on this list. Also, the beach vibes are nice, I think, if I remember right. Just being with a group of people, getting to know them and hanging out by the beach for a whole novel, I think is quite attractive to a lot of readers today. A lot of people read, not so much for character, not so much for plot, but just for vibes, right? Just for a particular atmosphere, a particular feeling of transporting yourself or escaping to a certain place. And descriptions of the ocean and the rocks by the sea and stuff like that. I quite like that. And I think if you're the kind of reader who likes to read for vibes, then this does that pretty well. Warping back to the old footage. Next is the very first book I ever spoke about on this channel, The Beast in the Jungle by Henry James. It's super short. It's 75 pages long, and with pretty big type here. This is what makes this feel long is that the sentences that Henry James writes in general, I think, often feel like a kind of a blue whale fighting a giant squid because they're so big and cumbersome and huge, not cumbersome really, but like kind of like, there's bits of grammar and syntax which are setting you up for things which come later, and it gives you this kind of tangly feeling. It's not quick to read, so it's nice to be able to indulge in that kind of writing, knowing that you've got a clear end in sight. And also, while it's not a snappy read, it's still like got a good interesting story and characters to propel you through. It's about this guy who meets a woman at a party who he'd known before, and what brings them together is the fact that he told her a secret about himself in the past. And this is one of those books where the secret itself is not as important as what it means to keep a secret, and like what how does that affect your life when you're holding a piece of knowledge which is shared with just one other person, and it's something very important to you, and like how does that shape how you and that person interact and how you sort of move around the secret. It's a topic that I really like every time that I've encountered it in literature. I can only think of one other book off the top of my head that really does it. It's also just got moments which are really sweet. Like, there's this kind of abstract struggle going on, but at the same time, you've got just these little punctuations of like human kindness and warmth, and this sort of like, is it friendship? Is it romance? Will they, won't they, between the two characters? Which just, it makes me smile. It made me smile when I was reading it. And it's those moments, I think, which really make it work as a whole. Let's do some Dostoevsky now. I got the double here. It's actually the double and the Gambler. I've never read the Gambler though, so can't recommend that. But the double is about this guy Golyadkin, and one day at work, he gets a co-worker who is also called Golyadkin and is his doppelganger, and he's already quite an insecure person, so this doesn't help. I think like the main Dostoevsky novella which would fit this, which gets recommended the most, is Notes from the Underground, which is also fantastic. It kind of depends like what sort of bruised male ego are you in the mood for. Do you want to have this loser who's like really resentful and quite aggressive and like kind of pent up anger and stuff like that, which is Notes from the Underground? Or do you want to read about this office clerk with imposter syndrome, which has got like kind of gothic undertones, not overtones. It's more psychological than gothic, but it's there, right? Because it's a doppelganger, and that's Golyadkin in the double. And for me, it's got to be Golyadkin. Speaking of gothic, we have this classic horror ghost story, sort of almost like detective novel in a way, that I can't shut up about. Pedro, Páramo, I talk about it all the time. It's about this guy searching for his father in a haunted Mexican village called Comala, yada yada. I've done so much talking about this, I don't need to say more about the actual story, I think. A lot of people know that the most famous Latin American like kind of novel in the modern day is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, but this is the one that inspired it, and it's so much shorter and in my opinion better. Also, like, it's easy to read, not like something like Beast in the Jungle or whatever. The sentences are so crisp and clean, and they give you like these descriptions of nature and like the heat and the dryness, and you can really feel what's happening. It's like, it was written in the 50s, so it is a little more modern, like the writing style, right? I should say though that I've heard a lot of people who read this do kind of get stuck on it in a way, because maybe it's because the writing is so easy that you read it kind of quickly, but actually there's lots going on because of the ghosts means that there's the past and the present, and they're all mingled together, and it's very fragmented, and you kind of have to tease out the pieces and think about different things to put it all together, like a detective figuring out what happened to this town, why is it cursed, and stuff like that. But that's why it's so good, For me, it's like the best novel ever written. Let's stay with a spooky theme since we're here. This is the Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner. This is for someone who wants to read a gothic novel but also wants to really be challenged. While it's under 200 pages, this is work. This is really hard work. So this is if you want to read something with a short word count, but you're also ready to go to a lot of Wikipedia pages to learn about Calvinism, like the theological debates going on in Scotland in like the 1600s. This was written later, but it's set like 100 years prior to when it was written. I think it was written in the early 1800s, right? It's also got a very particular structure where we get this morbid story about a guy who thinks he has this God-given right to just sin, and then nothing will happen to him because of his beliefs and stuff like that. But we get that story once from one character's point of view, and then again from his from the guy himself, his point of view. So you read the same story twice, and that's not for everybody. Also, some bits are in Scots, like Scots English. So that's a dialect which has words that are not always comprehensible if you don't know about like Scots, right? So this has got a notes section, which, you know, explains some of them, but you do have to flip back and forward. And I've seen editions of this which don't even have notes at the end. They just expect you to know this dialect of English, which, you know, most people don't. So this is for people who want the short page count, but who also really want a challenge, because this will flex your brain muscles and make you have to do a lot of interneting, I think, to get everything out of it. But it is so worth it. It's my favorite Gothic novel. It's not just a Gothic novel, it's historical. It's got like all these interesting ideas in it. It's structurally playful. It's also like postmodern. Like, how is it postmodern even though it was written in the early 1800s? I don't know, but it is. Like, James Hogg, the author, actually appears at some points, and like there's lots of metafictional stuff, lots of like complicated puns and stuff that means that you won't get everything out of it in one reading. I certainly didn't, but it's that richness which makes it like such a great book, and all in less than 200 pages. Seb from the future, just interjecting here in case this sounds a little bit too meaty, a little bit too dense for you, but you would like to read a short Scottish Gothic book, then this book inspired another one, the much more famous Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. That book is also fantastic. It's much more readable. There's less depth to it, obviously, and I think like the main problem with reading it in the modern day is that it is kind of a mystery, and is a mystery which has been spoiled like endlessly through popular culture. So basically everyone knows what the connection between Jekyll and Hyde is, unfortunately, but it's still a good read. What else have we got here? We've got The Dangerous Age by Karin Michaelis, another old school epistolary novel. This one is not so famous. It's about a woman, Elsie Lintner, who gets divorced and then goes off to live on an island because she, as she puts it, like, I'm past my prime, I've reached the dangerous age, you know, I don't need to exist in society anymore, because what is the point of a woman existing in society once she's, you know, getting close to her menopause and stuff like that. So like, it's fantastic. She's so snarky, and she's writing in letters and diary entries and so on. This edition, right? Like, it's published by hardpress.net. So like, it's obviously just been printed from the Gutenberg website if you look at it. But I mean, like, that's fine. The pages are like a nice color, that the text isn't too small. It's nice and light while being quite big as well. And it says printed by Amazon, right? But I've got other books by Amazon, printed by Amazon, right? Because like that is the only way to get those books. I hate supporting Amazon, but like that is the only way to get those books physically. And yeah, those books, the covers are falling apart, whereas this I've had for so many years and it's still pristine. So I don't know if you can get this edition of it, I recommend it. But yeah, like there's no publishing information apart from hardpress.net. So it looks a bit dodgy. Next, let's talk about Japanese poetic diaries, specifically The Narrow Road to the Deep North by Matsuo Basho. This, I have this actually is reprinted here by a different translator, and I've never read this version of it, so I'd like to read that. All the books I've talked about so far, I think, have been novellas, right? You can class them as that because of their length. Whereas the Japanese poetic diaries, or haibun as they're called, are like prose diaries, but interspersed with haiku and different like styles of poetry, mostly haiku, I think. And that just creates like this really interesting reading experience, which is hard to get anywhere else, right? Like, I really like poetry and prose when they're like mixed together, and this is like a form which is built around that. I think Matsuo Basho is particularly accessible both in the sense that I think that this his work has been published a lot in English compared to some of the other people like that are here, but also accessible in the sense that he's just writing about walking through nature. Basically, he walked all around Japan and he stayed at temples and stayed at people's houses and stuff, and he wrote poems as he went. There's like one funny bit as well, like when he's about to leave, they ask him to write a poem, you know, and since he hasn't paid or anything like that, he's like, oh, I better write a poem. And so he like looks around and sees like some random bit of nature, and he says, the sun falling on the weather vane or whatever, you know. Honestly, it just makes me think, damn, why can't we do that now? Why does Matsuo Basho get to waltz around the countryside, staying places for a poem, whereas I have to pay the Airbnb rate? We need to go back to the old ways. I'm just saying that's how it should be. Also, I think I want people to read these just because a pet peeve of mine is the way that haikus have entered Western popular culture as, you know, just being 575 syllables, right? And then you can just write a normal sentence and just divide it where, you know, put line breaks after every 5 syllables or whatever, and make sure you end. I don't know. It really bothers me. And the 575 thing is obviously not in these because they're like proper translations, and haiku is We'll save this rant for another time. And last but not least, we have Michael Kohlhaas by Heinrich von Kleist, my hero. This book, The Marquis of O and Other Stories, includes Michael Kohlhaas, which is 100 pages long, so I think counts as a novella. It's also published separately. I'll like put a picture here or something. Michael Kohlhaas is a horse trader who one day on his way to the market finds his way blocked because the guy who owns that bit of land has decided to put up like a new tax for anyone to use the road that goes through his land. And since this is a new thing, obviously, Mr. Kohlhaas doesn't have the tax to pay. So he's like, okay, I'll give you one of my horses as like a deposit, right? And then I'll come back and I'll pay the money when I can and you give me the horse back. And they agree to this. He does it, but when he gets back, the horse has been beaten. It has not been fed. It is like really badly, it is like malnourished, right? It's not the same animal that he left them. This obviously makes Michael Kohlhaas and the reader very upset, right? We are not here for animal abuse. We are not here for landowners lording it over people dishonorably, mistreating others just so that they can like squeeze a few more pennies into their pockets, right? So we are on Michael Kohlhaas' side. And then things escalate. This is a story of someone who goes through all the proper channels to get justice, and when justice doesn't come, is prepared to exhaust every other option until justice does come. So we get this great escalation effect as we move from the situation with the horse to something that has much, much larger repercussions. And I won't go too far into it. I will say that we get some supernatural stuff at the end, and in the introduction, the guy who translated this complained about that and said like, oh, that's kind of the flaw with the story, is that it just goes a bit too far. But I completely disagree. I love the supernatural bit. I love how it gets kind of almost like the genre can't contain the wrath of Michael Kohlhaas. It starts to blend and change. We get like Martin Luther appears at one point, and then it's like you're reading historical fiction, right? So I love the escalation in this. And unlike, The Sorrows of Young Werther or To the Lighthouse or one of these more like interior emotional psychological things, Kleist writes, he gets his big themes through plot. He is very much a plotty person. So, while you get these big ideas about justice and stuff like that, it's very much based on the action. So if you want more plot, then Kleist has got you covered. So there you have it, like a bunch of short books. This is so light. Like normally when I'm holding one of these, I can't like do that or anything like that. So this is refreshingly light, and I hope that reading these will also be refreshing to you if you're interested. Let me know down in the comments your favorite short classics. I'd love to hear some more recommendations, because I often feel like I want to read more and more classics, but then I don't really get through that many in a year realistically. So I should probably focus on smaller ones, right? Because there's so many out there. But anyway, yeah, thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you in my next video. Bye.